Started. Welcome to this public hearing for the inquiry into Greyhound Welfare and Integrity Commission. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the land on which we are meeting today. I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today we'll be hearing from representatives from Greyhound Racing New South Wales as well as CG Insight. I thank everyone for making the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. A transcript for today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses may say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it is important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. If witnesses are unable to answer a question today and want more time to respond, they can take a question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 12 days. I ask you to note it's 12 days, not the normal 21. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, I remind both committee members and the witnesses to speak into the microphone. And finally, could everyone please turn off their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing. I now welcome our witnesses, Mr. Robert McCauley and Dr. Alicia Fuller. Could each witness, starting with you, Ms. Fuller, please state their full name, position, title, and swear either an oath or an affirmation.
Certainly. So, Dr. Alicia Fuller, my role at GRNSW is the General Manager of Greyhound Development and Advocacy, which also includes the general management of the Greyhounds as Pets programme. My affirmation, I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. McCauley.
Thank you. If it pleases the committee, my name is Robert Gale McCauley. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Greyhound Racing New South Wales, and I swear that the evidence I'm about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement? If you do, could you keep it to a few minutes, please?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, could I tender a revised submission noting...
Could you maybe just pull the mic a bit closer to you? I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Certainly. Is that better?
That's better, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could tender, please, a revised submission from Greyhound Racing New South Wales. I
Thank you.
Tender that because of the length of time that's transpired since our original submission.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Sorry,
This is a supplementary.
It is.
Okay. Well, I'll get a copy and we'll circulate it. Thank you.
And
Please
sorry,
proceed.
Chair,
Sorry?
could you just commit to email that to me as well as soon as possible so I can look at it?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the New South Wales greyhound ecosystem as it exists today is a vastly changed environment. That change over a short period of time has been extraordinarily positive. In many ways, it's been remarkable. I believe it is appropriate in a forum such as this to demonstrate the scale and pace of that change. As such, I wish to report the factual details of this transformation and provide further context that Greyhound Racing New South Wales believes is relevant and important for now and the future. But first, I'd like to note that while it is common to reference greyhound racing in New South Wales as an industry, that it is, first and foremost, a largely regional, family-based, wholesome sport. It is a sport enjoyed by thousands of participants across New South Wales. They include many husband and wife partnerships, and often their children, and small operations of hobby trainers. The majority of participants reside in far-reaching corners and pockets of the splendid geographies of regional and rural New South Wales. It is a sport that delivers thousands of jobs and an economic contribution totalling more than $500 million to New South Wales annually. It is a sport that has now well-established welfare pathways and programs built on whole-of-life greyhound care for its much-loved animals, all the way from whelping to rehoming. It is a sport, according to independently published research, that has now surpassed more than 1.2 million fans in New South Wales. It is also a sport that, just not with my own legally opined hat on, now operates as the most highly regulated racing code anywhere in the world. The pace of this transformational change, including cultural and behavioural change, has been swift. It is little more than 4 years since the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission became operational on July 1st, 2018. It was on this date, which as we know was the culmination of well-publicised events, that Greyhound Racing New South Wales and GWIC each began their respective duties. This included a separation of functions and responsibilities, which were clearly defined as part of the New South Wales Government's legislated Greyhound Racing Act 2017. Greyhound Racing New South Wales side of the bargain is defined by the Act. At its inception, it included funding the Commission. The other core responsibilities for Greyhound Racing New South Wales under the Act are summarised in section 24 of the Act, and they are commercial viability, rehoming and welfare of greyhounds, and the viability of clubs and tracks. Mr Chairman, the outcomes delivered by Greyhound Racing New South Wales in each area of responsibility over the last 4 years, alongside an independent GWIC, have been an undeniable story of success. As a collective achievement, it is perhaps not as properly acknowledged or as celebrated as it should be. To make this point, I give you just a few facts and figures. Here is a sample of critical numbers that demonstrate the progress in a 4-year period from July 1st, 2018 to June 30th this year. Firstly, greyhound rehoming numbers are up 176% in that period, from 729 in 2019 to what will be reported as 2014 this financial year just ended. And that's due to a very wide range of welfare program investments by Greyhound Racing. Catastrophic injuries have more than halved in the same period. They were at 1.2 catastrophic injuries per 1,000 starts in FY 2019 to a soon-to-be reported 0.5 per 1,000 starts in FY 22. That can be ascribed to track improvements and a whole range of other welfare and safety programs. Importantly, prize money and returns paid to participants is up 62.5% in the same period. That is, it has gone from $28.5 million in FY 19 to $46 million in FY 22, and I'm confident to predict to this committee that it will probably exceed $50 million in FY 23. During the same period, wagering turnover is up 108% from $1.495 billion in 2019 to $3.11 billion this financial year. The dogs whelped that go on to race in New South Wales has also increased in percentage terms. That is what we call the utilisation rate, and that has increased from 68% to 74% during the relevant period. These achievements are underpinned by Greyhound Racing New South Wales' financial operating performance from a net loss of $1.5 million in FY19 to 3 years of operating surpluses. Those operating surpluses allow substantial reinvestment in safety, welfare and prize money initiatives. That money nearly all goes to regional and rural New South Wales. About 75% of participants in New South Wales are effectively from the bush. The platform of a successful business turnaround during that period has been built on strategic initiatives and implementation by a dedicated team at Greyhound Racing New South Wales. The outcomes, including financial performance, could not have been delivered without trust in the integrity of our racing and rehoming programs. I make these points in advance of anticipated questions because I believe they are a good reference for discussion about our sport's journey from past to present and on into the future. Before I outline the future, I want to touch base on just two aspects of the organisation that ought to be taken particular attention of. The first is what will emerge, or what has emerged during the deliberations of this committee on past organisational tensions that have existed between Greyhound Racing and the Greyhound Welfare and Integrity Commission. It is my view that a significant degree of this tension
Mr.
came
Macaulay, can I just ask you to move your microphone a little bit closer to you? You don't have to lean forwards. Just for Hansard to get the detail.
As you
for me
please.
to hear everything as well.
Mr. Chairman, it is my view that a significant degree of the tension that I referred to came from teething problems, some of which were alluded to in GRNSW's original submission that was filed in December 2020. The submission was made way back then at a more immature phase of a relatively embryonic GWIC. I'm very pleased to say that today much of the organisational tension has dissipated, courtesy of the New South Wales Government's subsequent restructuring of the funding mechanism for GWIC, which now allows for monies raised by government from the point of consumption tax to be distributed to GWIC. Furthermore, during the course of this Commission's existence, this Commission of Inquiry's existence, a new leadership at GWIC has been more collaborative and constructive. There now exists a greater level of maturity in the relationship. However, for the sake of our sports stakeholders, there are ongoing improvements that can still be made. Myself and all other GRNSW executives meet regularly with GWIC and its leadership team on a range of welfare and racing related issues. I've given my commitment to GWIC CEO Steve Griffin that I want this relationship further improved in the best interests of all of our participants and all of our greyhounds. We may still have a clear fence of responsibility that separates Greyhound Racing New South Wales and GWIC, but we're surely at this point in the same paddock. And this brings me very briefly to the future. If the past is well known for all of its addressable issues and the present day transformation of the collective industry is blindingly obvious, then the future funding of our sport, including long-term certainties to support greyhound welfare, depends on the biggest financial issue facing the sport, and that is tax dividend fairness. The big question for New South Wales greyhound racing participants is when will tax fairness be delivered? In the face of any criticisms, questions or microscopic probity of greyhound racing in New South Wales, the fact is that every person in this room can directly influence the future proofing for greyhound welfare at the stroke of a pen from this Parliament building. As highlighted in our original submissions, and no doubt will be raised again today, Greyhound Racing New South Wales and the sport more generally is being denied fair and equitable funding redistributions of the money the sport generates to the tune of about $29 million a year. Now, that is not the fault of the current government or even its predecessor. It is a historical anomaly that first arose many years ago and has never been addressed. The unfair treatment of greyhound racing in New South Wales is based on the money the sport generates not being proportionally redistributed according to the portions of contribution. It is self-generated money leaking out of three buckets, and those are the inequitable distributions of tax parity, the point of consumption tax, generally referred to as POCT, and by a legislative cap on what is known as race field information use fees. It may seem complex, but it is simple. Greyhound racing New South Wales and the industry more widely is being starved by the inequity of how a pie that is in fact rapidly growing is being thinly sliced for a return to participants. These, Mr. Chairman and inquiry members, are outlined in our original submissions, and they have not changed from that date to this. The summary bottom line of these inequities is that New South Wales Greyhound Sport and GRNSW as the commercial body for the participants is being denied $29 million per year, not cumulatively, per year, each and every year. That would be money spent on greyhound welfare solutions and supporting the livelihood of participants who are the original generators of these funds. GRNSW is in effect being handcuffed by this historical unfairness. Any suggestions that GRNSW should be doing more must keep this inequity in mind. After all, the greyhound industry in New South Wales has been fairly tested by the scrutiny and reform placed upon it over the past 4 years. But after having emerged and reformed from its past to its new and proud foundation of the present, the future of the sport should be about total fairness for the certainty of its animals and its people. Finally, just on this point, I would refer this Commission of Inquiry and to the Special Commission of Inquiry by Michael McHugh, where at recommendation 64, he stated or recommended, if the racing codes cannot agree on a more equitable distribution of TAB revenue, being one of those buckets, the Parliament of New South Wales should legislate to amend the current arrangements by providing for a distribution that reflects each code's contribution to TAB revenue. Ladies and gentlemen, that report was dated June 16th, 2016, more than 6 years ago. On behalf of our sports participants, I submit that it's better late than never to address it now. Those are my submissions, my opening statement.
Thank you. Questions?
Yep. Oh, you go have that.
Sure. Great, thank you. And thank you very much for your attendance today, Mr. Macaulay and Dr. Fuller. I wanted to start by looking at a report from May this year that was exposing the fact that most former industry greyhounds arriving at community-run greyhound rescue groups were in poor condition on arrival. That was some 89% of those dogs were reported to be in poor condition. This was corroborated by evidence to a hearing of this committee earlier this year, provided by 3 New South Wales-based rescue groups. I will table a document containing photographic evidence that was provided to my office directly by by 2 New South Wales-based rescue groups, Greyhound Rescue Inc. and Rescue Greyhounds New South Wales Central Coast, which document injury and neglect visible on arrival at their rescues. And I will just get that passed up to you. As you can see, these photos show gaping wounds, untreated broken bones, decaying teeth, flea infestation, and starved and emaciated bodies. Again, 89% of the dogs being presented to these rescue organisations. You said in your opening statement that you're now operating in a vastly changed environment, that this was a wholesome sport, that there'd been transformational change, and yet what we see before us looks very similar to what we saw before this industry was reformed. What do you say to these photos?
I can't comment on these particular photos. It's the first time I've seen them. I don't know what their source is, but I'm happy to take it on notice and get back to you.
Is it true that that GAP is turning away dogs who don't present in the most, I guess, the most top condition, so that GAP is really only taking those dogs that can be easily rehomed and letting dogs like these ones be left, I guess, for trainers and owners to take to rescue organisations?
No, I'm very pleased that that's not true, and I'm very happy to let Dr. Fuller, who is in charge of GAP rehoming programs, answer the question.
Thank you.
Dr. Fuller, sorry, I didn't realise you had an opening statement too.
No, sorry, I didn't actually. It was all incorporated in Mr. Macaulay,
okay,
so I'm
sorry.
happy to answer the question. So I can comment on the entry process to the GAP adoption centres in particular. We actually have now what is called a pet ready assessment. So when greyhounds are presented to greyhounds as pets, they need to be prepared to be a pet by their owners. That is a requirement under not only the Code of Practice, but also the rehoming policy of the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission. That greyhound can present to a pet ready assessment as many times as is necessary. It's a behaviour assessment which relies, or as all behaviour assessments do, is no animal must be in pain when they undergo a pet ready test. And certainly, obviously, I cannot confirm the source of your photographs, but if greyhounds were presenting in this condition to greyhounds as pets, this would be a matter that was referred to Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission immediately.
Yep,
and
I
those
believe-
participants would be responsible for the veterinary treatment of the animals under their care, as is dictated by their code, the rules of racing, and the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission policies, which they all agree to adhere to.
Yeah, so GWIC does have enforceable standards that dogs must meet when leaving the industry, clearly not in a state like we're seeing before us here. And all of the rescuers that appeared before the committee previously said that they informed GWIC. So it's not a matter of no action being taken because they aren't reporting. And yet we're still having more dogs than these organisations can cope with being presented in conditions like this. Are participants scared to bring their dogs to GAP when they look like this? Or is it just a simple case of GAP goes, there's no way that we're ever going to rehome this dog, so you're going to have to deal with it elsewhere?
No, so the other thing about the pet ready test is that there's actually no refusal of entry to GAP, so they can present as many times as is required. And also now, after 2 pet ready assessments, which an owner trainer may not be able to move forward with a dog for whatever reason, they actually come into our pet prep program. We still see that participants do choose to use other rehoming groups, and I would suggest that if any of these cases had been presented to the Integrity Commission, they would have been fully investigated, and I hope that's the case. And I would also say that what the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission need to increase their regulation and of the rehoming organisations themselves. We're looking at some accredited guidelines which will help us all to have best practice standards, and that will hopefully help to make sure that these cases are flagged early and appropriately prevented or dealt with. We also work with the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission to take in what is considered welfare seizures and intakes through GAP, so not through their normal process. And the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission inspectors come to us when they identify cases such as these, and we look to house them separately from the normal intake program to the adoption centres.
Can I ask you, your most recent annual report states that Greyhound Racing New South Wales assisted rehoming numbers rose to 1,880 for a single year, which includes figures of 521 dogs adopted at centres, 220 rehomed through GAP New South Wales regional programs, and 1,139 through the Greyhound Racing New South Wales Homing Assistance Scheme. Your operating licence requires you to set an annual rehoming target and report against it. Can I confirm whether the target you've set includes all 3 of those rehoming pathway
Yes,
categories?
it does. So currently the rehoming target is based off Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission reporting on their predicted number of retirements, and at the moment it was based off a previous average. We have a population model in development that will allow us to have a really clear guidance of the rehoming capacity that we will require each year within industry, and then how Greyhound Racing New South Wales and the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission to work together to support the participants in meeting that rehoming requirement.
So what is the target?
The current target is 2,000.
So 2,000, but to the extent that, for example, Greyhound Racing New South Wales assisted dogs accounted for 2,000 as opposed to rehomed dogs, would that meet the target?
So it's assisted retirements, yes, certainly. And it's also, we don't see that all 2,000 greyhounds are looking to come into adoption centres or the shelter type environments. What we've actually found is a much better rehoming route for our greyhounds so that they're not kept in shelters for a long period of time is actually the development of the regional program.
What are the regional programs? Can you?
So the regional programs actually work. The owners and trainers or the custodians of the greyhounds keep them in their care within industry, and the regional coordinators assist in them preparing that greyhound as a pet and then matching them to a suitable adopter and to be rehomed into the general public. So it's a really great way of the industry actually having contact with the adopters. They provide advice to the new home, and they also continue with ongoing contact and advice once that greyhound is in the new home. So as well as being supported by the Greyhounds as Pets team, the industry participants themselves are actively involved in the rehoming.
So with the homing assistance scheme, what needs to be done by GAP or Greyhound Racing New South Wales for a dog to be counted as part of that number then?
Yeah, so the homing assistance scheme pathway is to enable participants to meet their requirements under the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission rehoming policy, which states that all greyhounds must be desexed and in good health to be rehomed. So it provides rebates for desexing, dental, vaccination, worming, a blood test if they're over a certain age. So it's making sure that all of the greyhounds that are coming from industry and confirming that they will be in good health when they move forward into their next stage of life.
Does GAP ever see those dogs?
That they're not actually part of the Greyhounds as Pets program, so they're actually Greyhound Racing New South Wales rehoming schemes.
So the 1,139, right? So that's not sort of
so
rehomed.
when we're reporting numbers and when Greyhound Racing New South Wales is purporting its rehoming target or assistance rehoming target to GWIC, that is including GAP adoption centres, GAP regional programs, and the GRNSW welfare schemes.
So that might explain why there's this discrepancy then. So we've got you're stating that you're rehoming or assisting about 1,880 greyhounds in 2020 to 21. GWIC's annual report said 1,420 retirements in the same year, including 229 rehomed privately to a non-participant, 447 accepted by a rescue organisation, and only 339 accepted by GAP.
Yeah. So there's another, within that data set as well, there are two separate data sets. So actually GWIC is a participant reported number, and it's born from compliance of the retirement notification form. From a assisted rehoming point of view, that's actually an output number. So we're not reporting the intake into GAP, and we obviously have greyhounds in care for a period of time before they're adopted. We're reporting the adoptions as they occur, which is output. So they're actually two separate data sets, and they're also derived from two separate inputs. Our inputs are the microchips of the greyhound are recorded, and that microchip number or is unique to every greyhound, and then that is also a set of audited microchips at the end of every year to confirm that they have received assistance into retirement through Greyhound Racing New South Wales.
But in terms of direct rehoming then in 2020 to 21, what was the number for GAP?
I'd have to take that one on notice.
Okay, because clearly you get almost 5 million a year. While no community-run greyhound rehoming organisation receives any public money, but on these figures they're actually rehoming more greyhounds than GAP.
I think you're referring to the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission numbers, which again are participant reported. They're certainly not even coming from the rehoming organisations themselves, which again is something with GWIC and GRNSW we'd like to come to a point where actually those greyhounds that are going into other organisations are reported back to the Integrity Commission as well, so that they actually understand the numbers fully. And that is really important to keeping track of those greyhounds throughout their lives.
I might just add
Yeah,
something
sorry,
to
go on.
that. And that is that we are working constantly with GWIC to improve information sharing between the organisations. GWIC is informed, the GWIC numbers are informed by participant notification. Our numbers are informed by microchipping of dogs. And at the end of this month, only a couple of weeks away, will be the introduction of e-tracking, and that will, we are all entirely confident, will lead to entirely definitive numbers.
Hallelujah.
Mr. Macaulay, I just want to go to the question of breeding of greyhounds. And in your submission, your original submission on page 4, you talk about GWIC controls or as assumed responsibility originally, of course, and still is the case, I think, for controls related to breeding. And then in your, I think it's fourth paragraph down, dot point, I should say, GR New South Wales notes that whelping numbers are historically at low levels and less than an ideal number. What do you mean by that?
By the latter part, less than an ideal number?
Yeah, is it you're talking about dogs being able to participate in the industry, or?
Yes, certainly we are. So ultimately, to have greyhounds race, you obviously have to have dogs whelped about 2 years roughly beforehand, before a dog is ready to race. And so there is a long lead time between any whelping season and a subsequent racing season. And so there's a long planning phase, and to have more racing or less racing for that matter will obviously change the demand for puppies coming through the system. And so we would like to always population plan, if you like, to ensure that there is neither an undersupply nor an oversupply.
This is where I'm going. Who actually makes a decision on that?
So currently that is it's GWIC in consultation with industry.
So how is that arrived at?
Through, I think, Mr. Borzak, the best people to answer that are GWIC, but I will say just very broadly that it is an amalgamation of the known racing timetable and the known utilisation rate of dogs, that is what you might call the matriculation rate of dogs going from puppies to racing.
Well, let me put it this way. What incentive does GWIC have, apart from your persuasive powers, to supply the industry with enough dogs that are of a quality that can actually race and win races consistently?
They have their obligations and responsibilities under the Act, which includes to make the and keep the industry viable.
Yeah, but that's a bit fluffy, isn't it?
With great respect, you'll have to ask them that.
Okay. Just in relation to puppy bond, is that still something that's on the table somewhere?
Mr. Borzak, we have covered puppy bond in our submissions. We do not support a puppy bond, notwithstanding that it was a recommendation of the Greyhound Industry Reform Panel all of those years ago. We don't support it for a very good reason. Whelping numbers and greyhound breeding generally is very tightly regulated on a constant, ongoing basis by GWIC, and if we need more dogs or less dogs, then that will work its way through the system, and no puppy bond is necessary. This is covered in our written submissions.
10 minutes each. Thank you. Just turning now to greyhound racing tracks themselves and funding upgrades and safety. I noticed in your preamble you talked about tracks, better design, etc., as one of the reasons why you believe there are less injuries or less catastrophic injuries. What's the story in relation to funding the ongoing development and renewal of tracks and resources open to the industry?
Yes, Mr. Borzak, there's effectively four sources of funding for track redevelopments and improvements, and they are firstly the Greyhound Capital Grants Fund, which was established by the previous government and provides a pool of $30 million to expend on safety improvements and welfare improvements on tracks. Last year, in consultation with government, we also established the Greyhound Future Fund, the GFF, which provides another $5 million or over the next 5 years, so another $25 million on top of that. The third pool of money is general funding that is supplied out of operating surplus, if you like, from Greyhound racing into a whole slew of track improvements. And the fourth tranche of money is monies raised by clubs themselves or redistributed to clubs through club funding arrangements between those clubs and Greyhound Racing New South Wales. Those monies arise largely as a result of dividends that are payable pursuant to the broadcast rights sale for Greyhound Racing Vision.
Okay, thank you. Do you actually, I don't think I've ever seen a document that does this, but do you actually have a document that outlines or specifies or basically an audit of the condition of all the tracks, the 32 odd facilities in the state that are being used?
We do, and I'm very happy to supply that to you.
Can you table that?
I cannot here, but I'm certainly will take it on notice and
course,
table it.
in
Yes.
due course. Does that actually attach a dollar number to each one of these potential improvements, or are they just identifying improvements?
It identifies improvements, Mr. Borzak, but at the same time, we have not on that document, but we have within our own budgets, our own forward projections of capital works, the budget expenditures for those programs.
So what's the total figure for the next 10 years? There's a trick for young players.
Yes. So, and I did speak to this at an event here a couple of months ago, and our estimate over the next 10 years would be about somewhere between $300 million and $500 million over the next 10 years.
Okay, then that being said, listening to the sourcing of your income and those areas of capital improvement funds that you just mentioned, you're well and truly short of that, aren't you?
No, we're not, and that is because money continues to come in. There's a whole lot of sources of money. It's not just two capital fund or infrastructure fund programs. We have funds arising from distributions from TAB and funds arising from tax parity and other forms of sponsorship and income and broadcast rights. So there's very significant income, and that is largely applied to I won't say largely applied, about 50% of the income of Greyhound Racing New South Wales is applied to participant returns in one form or another. Largely that is prize money and travel subsidies for bringing dogs to races, and the other half of income is applied to welfare programs, safety improvements, and track maintenance and renewal.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 40 seconds left on the current time. I'll come to education next. You want to?
Yeah,
yes,
if I
please.
can jump next.
Courtney.
Thanks very much, Mr. Macaulay, Dr. Fuller. I appreciate your time. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Macaulay, you became the new CEO in August 2020. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And prior to that, you were the legal counsel for Greyhound Racing New South Wales?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have contact with Minister Anderson in your previous role as legal counsel for Greyhound Racing New South Wales?
Very occasionally, yes.
Okay. Can you give us an idea of how many times you would have met with him?
Perhaps twice a year.
Okay. And did you attend a race meeting in Muswellbrook with the Minister and the Chair of Greyhound Racing New South Wales
No,
last year?
not a race meeting. I attended a meeting.
A meeting. Okay. All right. And what was discussed at that meeting?
It was largely about our track program and the rollout of our track program, and particularly our new investments in tracks, Goulburn, Taree, Tamworth, various other projects.
Okay. Was a discussion at that meeting held about plans or an idea for Mr. John Barilaro to become the new CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales?
Chair, I'm going to raise a point of order at this stage. As interesting as I'm sure this is, I don't believe it's covered by the terms of inquiry, and I'd ask the member to move on to other questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll ask the member to actually explain how an inquiry into GWIC is relevant to Mr. Barilaro.
Yeah, well, I mean, in relation to the terms of reference, they are into the operation of GWIC, and obviously Mr. Macaulay is the new chair, the new CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales. Greyhound Racing New South Wales and GWIC have a very close relationship. I'm interested to know if, and I'm in no way reflecting on Mr. Macaulay's role as the CEO, and I welcome him into his appointment, but I'm interested to know if there were discussions about Mr. Barilaro taking on
No,
this
I'll
role.
allow the question. Okay.
Well, I'll re-put the point of order, Chair, perhaps in other terms. I'm just reviewing the terms of reference, and the terms of reference do not cover the question that's raised by the member, and so I'd ask.
Which part don't cover?
Well,
Any
I
other
don't believe
related
any of
item?
it is actually covered by the terms of reference. This is an inquiry into the Greyhound Welfare and Integrity Commission, and it doesn't include conversations about potential roles in the organisation. So it's clearly outside the terms of reference, and I'd ask you to rule that out of order.
Well, I would put to that, Mr. Chair, that you had made a previous ruling that this is allowable.
Let's move on. Let's let Mr. Macaulay answer the question or not, and we'll take it on notice, whatever he wants to do, and we'll work it out from there.
The answer to the question is no.
There were no discussions about Mr. Barilaro coming on as CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales?
Not to the very best of my recollection.
Okay. Were you aware of these discussions occurring between Greyhound Racing New South Wales and the Minister at any point during your time as legal counsel?
Chair, I'm going to raise the point of order yet again. This time, the question involves speculation, and again, it's not relevant to the terms of reference. Who might or might not be proposed for any position in Greyhound Racing New South Wales is not covered by the terms of reference, and I'd ask you to rule that out of order.
To the point of order, this is clearly related to Greyhound Racing New South Wales. There is that provision at the end of the terms of reference which refers to any other related matter. I think we should just be moving on.
No, I'll allow the question to be put because it's an extension of the previous one.
Ms. Eusos, could you just re-ask the question, please?
Of course. I understand. There's a bit of a delay. I'm interested to know, in your role previously as the legal counsel and the company secretary for Greyhound Racing New South Wales, if you were aware of informal discussions at any level about Mr. Barilaro becoming the new CEO or becoming the CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales?
No, I was not.
Okay, thanks very much. I wanted to turn then to and this might be questions for you, Dr. Fuller, around the funding that's provided to the rehoming for Greyhounds as Pets program. Now, my understanding is that's $950 for veterinary work. Is that correct?
So the $950 is the homing assistance scheme, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or it's a rebate up to $950.
Oh, yes, thank you for the clarification. And how was that figure arrived at?
So originally we looked at the costings prior to it coming into existence, the costings from greyhounds as pets, veterinary treatment. So how much did our program spend on desexing and dentals? And then it was actually a very generous cap to those things. And as the program moves forward, which obviously it's been in operation for a couple of years now, each year we review the costs against the caps, and we will be continually adjusting them as necessary with the actual costs that occur in the veterinary profession.
Okay, and as part of that review process, have you ever increased the funding?
Not at this stage, because it obviously started off very generous, and actually it does require, in the policy terms and conditions, it requires the vet practices to charge their normal pricing. The majority of these are actually still below cap. So until it comes to a point in time where their pricing for normal dogs within society would be higher, and then we'd review that cap.
And so that review process, is that a formal process that people can make submissions to, or is that just an internal process done by you?
No, it's certainly so the actual, if it's an individual case, they can actually submit a review to have costs covered above cap, and we do regularly cover dental costs, including dental extractions above cap, and then it's certainly something that everybody's welcome to submit, if their veterinary practices are costing more or they're not able to meet the costs, they can certainly come to us with a request and we will review it.
When you say everyone, is that?
So the homing assistance scheme can be claimed by the participants themselves. So it replaced the owner incentive scheme. So it assists them if they're actually retiring the animal as a pet to themselves. It can also be claimed by a member of the general public should they come into possession of a greyhound that hasn't yet been desexed, and it can also be claimed by the other rehoming organisations as well. We are actually trying to encourage participants to be the main accessors to the scheme, because under the rehoming policy, prior to them rehoming a greyhound, it is supposed to be desexed already. So if we're encouraging adherence to GWIC policy, we would like it to be a participant-based scheme and for them to be accessing it prior to the greyhound, moving through from the industry.
I understand. So when you say everyone is able to make submissions, are you able to provide on notice with how many additional amounts you've been provided? Or
yeah, certainly with a question on, I'll take it on notice,
please.
but we can let you know the above
that
cap costs, no problem.
Excellent. And if you can just maybe give the figures to me for the last 3 financial years,
Yep,
if that
would be
works.
possible.
How many were over the cap, and how many applications you received and how many were actually granted? That would be, and perhaps what's the largest amount? That would be helpful as well. Because I can certainly, I've met with some of the rescue organisations, and they have raised with me that this cap is actually far too low. And I appreciate what you're saying about reviewing the process, but I just think that's, they say that it's not enough for them to be able to do that. Now, I take your point about that this should be money for participants, and that's where you anticipate it going. But it's an issue that's been raised with me, and that's why I'm asking.
No, we're happy to review it.
Excellent.
I might say, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yeah, please.
Ms. Housos, in relation to that issue, we do get constant feedback and we take it on board about levels of funding for any of our programs. And some of that feedback comes from participants and some of it comes from veterinary surgeons. Different veterinary surgeons have different, capital costs that they need to cover. And we are constantly trying to find the right ground without applying inflationary pressure to vet costs and without providing too little. We certainly don't want to provide too little. We know, as a matter of fact, that of the three programs that or treatments that are supplied pursuant to this particular scheme, that some vets charge less for one or two of them and more for another, or vice versa. And overall, we're trying to make the package right. And we think that we've got the package right at any particular time, but I can assure you that we are very receptive to the needs of both participants and veterinary surgeons. There is no cap. I can tell you on how much we're willing to pay out in total under this scheme. We're not sitting, Dr. Fuller is not under some budget where we can only supply so much or so many treatments or fund so many treatments. We will allow it to grow according to demand. And if we're getting feedback from vets that it's not enough money, we will certainly attend to that.
And when you say you get feedback from vets, I appreciate that's one part of it. Obviously, then participants are one part that could be claiming it. Like I say, the rehoming organisations and sorry, what was the third one that you said could be claiming it?
Oh, so if a member of the general public,
yes.
has actually adopted an undesexed greyhound not through the other routes, then they're able to claim through as well.
So it might be helpful just again over those 3 financial years just to provide us with a list with the numbers of in those 3 categories who's actually claiming it. I'm also interested in the number of greyhounds who are rehomed directly through the GAP program, but then also through rehoming programs. Now, my understanding is that the GAP figures do actually pick up, given the way that GAP can partner with rehoming organisations and provide this funding. So you do actually pick up some of those figures.
Yeah, so the homing assistance scheme, the last section of GRNSW contribution to rehoming does pick up where those dogs have claimed that scheme. The Greyhounds as Pets adoption centres and the Greyhounds as Pets regional programs, they are the Greyhounds as Pets programs themselves.
Oh, okay, sorry. My apologies. Okay. All right, I understand the clarification. Did you have any questions?
I think that's what you know.
Oh, okay. Why don't I'll pass to my colleague because I think we've got about 5 minutes to go and then
7 minutes,
7.
if you're fast, yeah.
Thank you. Can I just, on your supplementary submission table today, the recommendations around your tribunal system that you're proposing, similar to the NRL and Vic Tribunal down south, can you just talk through with the committee why you would prefer this model and how you see it coming about?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. It's a very important issue in our view. We all know that justice must be done, but it must be seen to be done. It needs to be seen and understood to be just. And one of the very long-term problems in racing, as far as I know, it's been around for decades at the very least, is that stewards and regulators are the police, and they're the detectives, the investigators, and they're the prosecutor, and then their fellow stewards working for the same organisation are the judges. And so you literally have judge, jury and executioner all under one roof. And there is a perception, and I say that very carefully and deliberately, there is a perception that that does not deliver always a just outcome. I think it produces a much better outcome now than it probably ever has done in the past, and I think GWIC have made extraordinary advances in ensuring or doing whatever they can do to ensure that justice is perceived or seen to be done. But ultimately, we accept in every other facet of life that there ought to be a distinction or a division between people prosecuting or people investigating indeed and deciding whether there is a charge, and then people prosecuting, and then people sitting in judgment. This is of huge importance to greyhound participants because a penalty in greyhounds or indeed any other racing might ruin your life entirely. And I say that because a family who is sitting on what is generally a small family farm with greyhound facilities out the backyard, if they are disqualified from greyhound racing, they can be excluded from their premises. And that obviously would be dysfunctional for a start, but could be financially ruinous. So for many people, this is an extraordinarily high risk thing that they find themselves in, and people are entitled to a presumption of innocence. And if we're going to treat people as innocent until proven guilty, then we ought to have, for public policy and perception reasons, a division between the people policing and prosecuting and the people sitting in judgment over them.
So, are there any other reforms you're proposing? The disciplinary system? I mean, the tribunal is one thing, and I'm just going to probably, in the time, ask a couple more questions about that. But is that the only reform that you would see for the disciplinary system?
I think there is another problem that looms large, certainly in my mind and more broadly in the industry, and that is where what is known as the presentation rule, which is a strict liability rule, intersects with what is now effectively minimum sentencing regime in greyhounds. And we have always wished, certainly since the reform, and we continue to wish, to have a zero tolerance policy for the use of prohibited substances. Zero tolerance. And that is fine on this side of the equation, the presentation rule, but where a presentation rule offence intersects with a minimum, what effectively is a sentencing or penalty regime, then the person handing down the penalty has no discretion, no matter how substantial the mitigating factors are in that particular case. I know from my long experience in the law that every single case is different, and this is the problem with minimum or mandatory sentencing regimes, is that they take away the discretion of a decision maker to end up with a decision that is just and seen to be just. You can end up, we all would remember when they introduced in the Northern Territory minimum mandatory sentencing, what was called the 3 strikes and you're out rule, and the result of that was a boy who went to jail for stealing a packet of biscuits. And that is a perfect example of where a judge or a magistrate or anybody else, a steward, ought to be able, anybody who's meting out punishment, particularly by the state, ought to have a full range of discretion to go from 0 to a maximum penalty. It's for justice. It's as simple as that.
I've just got one more question, just about the in terms of the refunding of the money to participants. Are you able to give me a rough idea of what's the average time that a participant or a rehoming organisation should expect to get refunded within?
So usually we're
reimbursed, I should say.
Yeah, reimbursement. So we've recently, we did have some issues with the sort of efficiency of the system. It was being administered by one person within our organisation as it had grown so rapidly, and that was causing some delay in processing times. So we've recently gone to an online submission form and an increased resourcing for the program. Mm-hmm. Most of the times the reimbursements are actually, the veterinary practices are actually giving people accounts, so they're not directly to the participants or the rehoming organisations, they're actually to the veterinary practices themselves. And the majority of those claims, if they were submitted in full, were paid within the payment terms. Again, we had some issues with actually having full submissions of the completed form and the invoices. So we've increased the sort of education around what's required and also made that form submission a more streamlined process.
So perhaps on notice, if you can just tell me what's the average time over those 3 years as well of the reimbursement period?
Certainly.
And also what's the longest time for each in each of those financial years?
No problem.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Fang?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Mr. Macaulay, you've been involved with greyhound racing in New South Wales for some time, is that correct?
Yes, a few years.
Yeah, thank you. And in your time as the legal counsel before becoming the CEO, were you aware of any informal conversations that were happening within the Labor Party about their minister appointing as CEO Mr. Ian McDonald or Mr. Tripodi or anybody else from the Labor Party?
No.
Okay. Would that be because the minister doesn't appoint the CEO?
I suspect that would be the case.
Okay, so the question that was asked previously was probably pointless because it's actually the board that appoints the CEO, is that correct?
My employer is the board, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Macaulay, just in relation to the funding model that the proposals that you've put to the government, are you able to provide us some indications as to what they are and how the government has perhaps looked at and reviewed and accepted some of those funding models and the difference they're making within the actual industry?
Yes. The most significant change that has occurred in the last 2 years is the funding of GWIC. This committee would be aware of the fact that under the 2017 Act, the Act provides for an indemnification of GWIC's costs by GRNSW, and that I'm sure it was written in good faith and then legislated in good faith and with high hopes, but it enacted what was a constant commercial tension between the regulator and the commercial body. In May or early June 2021, the minister proposed a different funding model and one that would remedy that ongoing commercial tension, and that is that instead of us being Greyhound Racing New South Wales indemnifying entirely GWIC for its operating costs, that we would simply pass through our point of consumption tax receipts directly to GWIC, and that government would fund the operation of GWIC, whether high or low, from some other source. That leaves us both without a commercial tension, which has facilitated, I must say, a much better relationship, but it also has left, it did produce surplus funds that we otherwise would have been spending on GWIC to the tune of about $5 million a year. And we've happily been able to utilise those funds by putting them in the Greyhound Future Fund, which will then contribute to ongoing track renewal and safety improvements.
And we're seeing the results of that safety improvement, aren't we, in the numbers that you reported earlier?
It is remarkable, if I might say. We have a number of relatively new tracks. The standout, the pin poster boy examples would be the Grafton Circle track and the Richmond Straight track. The Richmond Straight track is turf and is probably, as far as we can tell from looking at stats around the world, would be the safest straight track in the world. And the Grafton track has been enormously successful. It is a loam circle track built to specificate both our own minimum standard specifications and with the assistance of various professionals, including the work that's come out of the University of Technology, Sydney. Features bigger radiuses at each end of the track, different cambers, longer transitions into straights, and it has made an enormous safety difference in racing. It is on statistically equal footing with the Richmond Straight track, and so that would make it also the safest greyhound track in the world. We are working constantly to take the learnings from these things and insert them into other projects. So this this committee would be aware of the fact that about a month ago or 5 weeks ago we announced a new straight track that we will build subject to council approval in Goulburn. I'm very pleased to say that we have the full support of council and the vocal support of our minister to deliver a new straight track in Goulburn. It will be even better. It must be even better than what we've been able to deliver in Richmond, because we've got all the data now coming out of Richmond. We're now, for the first time in greyhound racing history, we're now data rich, because most of our dogs running in most races are wearing a little electronic tag right up on the top of their shoulders, and it is an Isolinks tag, and it tells us, it gives us all sorts of data about where a dog is on the track. In fact, it gives us so much data that we're now learning how to grab that data, both from a safety and welfare point of view and from a track design point of view, and take that data and apply it to improved engineering designs for tracks. So that's the sort of projects that's going on that we're very proud of.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure if my colleague, the Honourable Luamato, might have any questions. Just wanted to offer him the opportunity.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Mr. Macaulay and Dr. for coming today. I'm not
I'll set you
sure.
up as deputy chair next time.
I'd be a good one.
Thank you. Now, I'm not sure. I think colleague Abigail Board might start touching on this. So, colleague, your opening statement, you mentioned about catastrophic injuries. They're at their lowest levels on record. Is that right?
Yes.
So, and I believe you use this metric of at least 0.5% per 1,000 starters. Can you tell us what that means?
Yes, Mr. Armato, for about 7 years, that statistic has been gathered, and it literally is the number of catastrophic injuries per 1,000 dog starts. This year we have, or this past financial year, I should say, we've had about 95,000 dog starts. I'm not talking about individual dogs, I'm talking about dogs starting races. And so we are down to about 0.5, in other words, about 0.5 of an injury per 1,000 starts. I might put it the other way around. Out of 2,000 starts, you would expect a catastrophic injury, statistically.
Okay, so basically it's come down.
It's come down dramatically, Mr. Armato. In the 7 years since this statistic has been reported, it started in FY16 as 1.6 per 1,000 starts. In FY17, it was the same. And then since the inception of the new Act and the concentration on track safety and a whole lot of other programs, and that really is what it is. It's an amalgam of a whole lot of different factors that we work with. It has been consistently driving down. It was then 1.2 per 1,000 starts in 19, 0.7 per 1,000 starts in 20, 0.7 in 21, and now we will be very happy to report in this year's financial reports and annual report that it is down to 0.5. I might just show you and this committee, Mr. Armato, a graph which illustrates the reduction in injuries.
Could you table that, please?
Very happy to, Mr. Chair. And this is to the beginning of financial year 21. The column that I'm pointing my finger at was 21, and this year there will be an even shorter column in that table, and that is the direction we want it to go. So we're very pleased with that, and it's a compliment to both the safety and welfare teams and the track construction and design and maintenance teams that is the result.
Mr. Pearson?
Thank you very much, Chair.
Mr. Macaulay. So since we're talking about so for the financial year
Can't hear the
21,
Sorry,
so can you hear me there?
Mr.
Sorry,
Amato, it's my
McCoy.
turn now.
I asked one question. I just got a couple more, if you don't mind. It's very important. I don't think you really appreciate it, Mr. Pearson.
Yeah, please.
May I do?
Just that the
Okay, thank
government's
you.
time was over, that was all.
Oh, okay, sorry, but it's just, I just think an important question, that's all. Just go very quickly. So for the financial year 21-22, how many dogs have died on New South Wales Greyhound tracks? And also, how many dogs, or how many deaths do you think Greyhound race New South Wales thinks is the acceptable amount?
I'm sorry, Mr. Armati, can you just repeat it? I'm having difficulty hearing you on this end.
Too.
Okay, so for the financial year 21-22, how many dogs have died on the New South Wales Greyhound tracks? And also, how many deaths does Greyhound New South Wales thinks is an acceptable amount or acceptable level?
It's a very good question, Mr. Amato. Ideally, we would have 0 deaths, and just like perhaps roads and maritime services in New South Wales and their desire, which they call towards 0, that is ultimately our aim as well. You know, if you compare us perhaps with a road toll, for instance, 250 odd people in New South Wales perished last year on the roads, and it is everybody's desire to track that down. It is our absolute desire to continue to make improvements to safety and welfare of greyhounds racing on tracks, and we're heading in the right direction. There is every care taken to ensure that we continue down the path to deliver the right outcome. I might say, in further answer to your question, that every participant in New South Wales wants the very best outcome for their greyhounds. Nobody wants to see a greyhound injured. Greyhounds are, though, elite athletes. They are taking part in racing, and there is a level of injury that is just concomitant with any athletic pursuit. We accept it in all athletic pursuits, animal and human, and the best that we can aim for is to drive it down and down and down and have it the lowest possible. Everybody, there's not an owner in New South Wales or a trainer in New South Wales that doesn't want their greyhound coming home safe and sound after a race, and that is our aim.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Pearson, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Dr.
Pearson, for your
Fuller,
indulgence.
I'm just wondering, you obviously have a doctorate. What is it a doctorate in?
I don't actually have a doctorate. I'm actually a veterinary surgeon. So my doctor title comes from my veterinary degree, and I'm a member of the New South Wales Board of Veterinary Surgeons as well.
Right. And I'm just trying to I understand you oversee the Greyhounds as Pets program.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in our questioning during budget estimates of the minister and the CEO of GWIC, it became clear that the numbers that GWIC were counting as rehomed and the numbers that Greyhound Racing New South Wales counts as being rehomed were quite different. And I understand then from what your statement, Mr. Macaulay, is that is going to be rectified, that the numbers will come together so that the community and people concerned will always know how many greyhounds have actually been rehomed out of how many applications have been made?
Yes.
Okay.
So we will be sharing more closely our data with GWIC, and we actually have their e-track scanners on site at our adoption centres now as well, which will help with the process. Mm-hmm. The difference in the data that they're actually reporting will always occur because they're reporting what would be a retirement from an industry participant, which we would consider an intake into an adoption centre or a regional programme. That greyhound's will spend an average of 6 weeks with us and then come out the other side. But we give them as much time as they need to become pet ready and also to find that perfect home. So there will always be a difference if GWIC continue to report retirement from participant and sort of what would be our intake numbers on a yearly basis. That will differ from our output numbers.
Okay, so the 95,000 dogs that Mr. Macaulay referred to as having a first start this year, is that correct? In the last financial year?
Correct.
Correct. Will we know where those 95,000 dogs are when they are retired, all of them, if they haven't died from a catastrophic injury or otherwise?
Yes, I might clarify that, if I might, Mr. Pearson. When I say 95,000 starts, I mean 95,000 dog starts of a race. So the actual racing population of dogs in New South Wales is much less than that. Of course,
do you know what that figure is?
we do, from time to time, can tell you exactly what it is. But
Shouldn't we know that, considering one of the major recommendations of all inquiries is about the ghost animals, the dogs we don't know where they are, etc.
Yes, I might address that. There is, it's a persistent myth that there's some ghost dogs. In its recent
We
work,
saw the ghosts during the Four Corners
Point of
program.
order.
And several
Point of
inquiries
order, Chair.
afterwards, Mr. Macaulay.
Point of
so
order.
I doubt if it's a myth.
Point of order,
Point
Chair.
of order
You
being
can answer the
taken.
question.
Mr. Macaulay was trying to answer the question. He was rudely interrupted by Mr. Pearson, and I'd ask you to invite Mr. Macaulay to continue answering the question and ask Mr. Pearson to withhold his enthusiasm until the question has been answered.
Yeah, look, I'll uphold the point of order. Please answer the question, and then Mr. Pearson can proceed.
we are getting much better every month, consistently better at knowing where animals are and what stage of their life or retirement they are in. This is all culminating this month, and we're all very pleased to see it in e-tracking, which will give us the best data ever. But for instance, my colleague Dr. Fuller now has at her disposal and the disposal of her GAP team these, what do you call them, dazzles, razzles?
Oh, the scanners.
The wands.
Yeah.
They're scanners.
From the Greyhound Welfare
Where
Integrity
at
Commission.
every...
Look, I'm sorry, Mr. Macaulay. The time is running out. I just have a couple more critical questions. So, Dr. Fuller, with your view of what's happening with rehoming, are the numbers of dogs going to reduce over time to be needing to be rehomed in the industry?
So what we're looking at currently is developing a population model which will give us an accurate estimate based on, whelping numbers over certain years, the number of dogs that are actually in the racing populations and the breeding populations, and then them who will require rehoming. Again,
is the number of those animals going to decrease over time?
That will depend on a number of factors, breeding, the number of industry participants or syndicates that rehome or retire the greyhound as a pet to themselves, which would be a pathway we're encouraging, and also the number of greyhounds that are coming out to be pet ready in a socialised way and moving through the system. So it will be a number that will be able to be clearly estimated by the population number that we're developing, and that will allow Greyhound Racing New South Wales and the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission to work together to make sure that there is the capacity to support all greyhounds to find a pet home or a retirement
There's no actual
home.
commitment to reducing numbers from either GWIC or Greyhound Racing New South Wales?
So reducing which numbers?
The numbers of animals being born into the racing industry. Is there an actual specific objective to bring that about?
Well, we think that they're relatively stable now and about where they should be, plus or minus a little bit, but I can indicate that there has been a very substantial reduction in dogs whelped in New South Wales. Back in financial year 15, there was nearly 8,000 dogs whelped in greyhounds whelped in New South Wales, whereas for each of the last 4 years, and I'm happy to supply these numbers to the committee, for each of the last 4 years there has been roughly a bit over 4,000 greyhounds whelped in New South Wales. But the good news is, of course, that the what we call the utilisation rate of those greyhounds whelped is increasing. So we have more efficiencies in greyhound racing, where puppies are coming through, they are racing, they're staying longer in their racing career, they're retiring later and healthier, and that is all a good news story. So rehoming going up is actually a good news story. We're happily rehoming happy dogs, and all of those
Okay, thank you
indicators
very
going
much,
in the
Mr.
right
Paul.
way.
I have to move on to the next
Can we
question.
just clarify that though?
Yeah, sure.
Did you just say that the number of pups being whelped is actually lessening? Because it's going up 50% a year, isn't it?
Oh no, not even close. Nothing like it.
So 2018 to 19 was 3747. We're now looking at 4567 in 2020 to 21.
In fact, if I look at it depends, of course, Ms. Boyd, how you cut the numbers. The numbers
Your annual reports.
for the numbers, I can say that for the 4 years since reporting, since the inception of the new Act, the numbers have been 3747, 3935, 4567,
Right, it's an
and
increase.
4450.
So they haven't gone down.
Yeah.
But the average, well, if you bear with me for a second, the average for the 4 years before that was higher. So in fact, they
That
have
was
gone down.
Yeah, but that was reform, and then there was reform. We had a significant drop, and now we've been increasing pretty much every
Well,
year.
it's my turn now to ask a couple of questions just quickly before we run out of time. Mr. Macaulay, regarding GWIC's costs, and you mentioned earlier that there was, I think, $5 million or something being supplied in terms of direct revenue from the government. Is that the removal of the total cost burden of GWIC on GR New South Wales, or are there other costs involved?
No, that's the complete removal of the cost burden.
So, okay, so based on that, is there this will feed into another question in relation to GWIC, but is there a customer service level agreement that you have with GWIC?
Yes and no, if I could have both options. We have ongoing expectations. They have an expectation from us.
But shouldn't there be an MOU or a customer service agreement that says this is what you're going to get, this is what you were paying for, this is what the government's now paying for, and this is what the expectation of the outcomes of all of that are?
Mr. Borzak, we have an agreement with them that we work together to ensure the utilisation rate or the use rate of tracks is at the very highest level possible. So they supply their staff when we need them at our nominated race meetings. That used to be a tussle when we had a funding
you talk
funding
about
tension. It's not now.
Well, yeah, but I mean the reality is you talk about in your submission there about benchmarking GWIC to GR Victoria regulatory organisation, and that you say that the costs of GWIC are at least 50% over the odds. Do you still support that?
No, I don't. And the reason I don't, there's a very simple explanation, Mr. Borzak. That submission was written in December 2020, and since that time, there's been a complete reform of the funding model for GWIC, and I and my organisation no longer fund it, and we wouldn't know what their budgets are. Their budgets, I presume, are reportable to Treasury and to the Minister.
So the funding arrangements have changed, so you don't have a line of sight in terms of what GWIC's costs to run are anymore.
That's correct.
Okay. Regarding the tribunal system, and my colleague Mr. Veets mentioned that over here earlier, you say in your recommendation 31 that GR New South Wales supports a review and reform of the disciplinary system currently administered by GWIC. Then you go on in 32 to talk about the preferred model being the tribunal system, as in, for example, NRL, AAU, Racing Victoria, etc. Would you envisage that just only relating to greyhounds, or would you see that covering, perhaps as it does, I think, in Queensland, all codes?
We would certainly like it for greyhounds. I would have thought if it was successful with greyhounds, it was a easy step to take onwards from there.
And who would fund that?
In one way or another, it would be funded by the industry through the raising of taxes on the industry, as happens now. I might point out this while we're here, that all of the funding that industry gets back through government arose from the industry. And so ultimately, the industry is not only self-funding, it provides an enormous financial boon to the taxpayers of New South Wales and to the citizens and participants more broadly.
All right, I know we've got to 2:45, which is the end of questioning.
Can I just ask one final question?
Yeah, please.
Sorry, Mr. Macaulay, you said that you did attend a meeting at the Muswellbrook race track.
Did.
Can I just ask when that was, roughly? Do you know?
Yes, from memory,
Yes.
it was in about the first week of December
Beautiful.
last year.
Thanks so much, very much.
All right. You got one more? Okay.
One more, if you don't mind. Mr. Macaulay,
You want one?
you may be aware that there have been some participants who've been prosecuted for permitting the firing of their greyhounds. Are you aware of that case at all?
You'd have to tell me which case it is, Mr. Pearson.
Well, it's very specific in that it relates to the firing of greyhounds and knowingly permitting that to be done. Are you aware of that case?
I'm happy to take questions on individual cases on notice.
Okay, if you could take that on notice, please. Could you also tell me in your inquiry into it, or whether you know, did the person who performed the firing operation or the firing procedure, are they being dealt with by GWIC or yourselves in any investigative with a view to prosecuting
I've never fired
at all?
I can't answer questions about individual matters, but I'm happy
Oh, I
to
think
take.
you can. The Greyhound Welfare. You have a policy
Point of
position
order, Chair.
on
Point of
firing,
order.
and I think you
I
can.
think
Just take it on notice.
So take it on notice, please.
Everyone else is getting one final question, so I'm going to have one. We were talking before about the numbers of dogs rehomed and the microchipping. Can I just check, do you share the microchip numbers of greyhounds that are rehomed with GWIC?
Yes, and we're now sharing them on a monthly basis.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
I've got no final questions. Just thank you for coming. It's Friday afternoon. Good luck.
All right, thank you very much for coming. I note you've taken a number of questions on notice. You've got 12 days to respond. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we might just have a 10-minute slot. If latest finish, will they make another 10?
Is that extra?
Okay.
I've just been reading this.
for disciplinary powers to be taken and given to a new body, so what Greyhound residents have asked for.
Okay.
That's the submission.
Welcome, Mr. Young. Could you please state? Could you please take the oath or an affirmation? One or the other should be in front of you, or both.
Do I just read out the words?
Yeah, with meaning.
Oath. I swear that the evidence now I am about to give by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Would you like to make a short opening statement?
So yeah, after hearing Mr. Macaulay, I'm just going to improvise something that he did mention in regards to the Northern Territory and how they had that gentleman who was shoplifting and ended up being incarcerated. In relation to that, the law is not black or white. That's what we've learnt in law school. The law is grey. And in taking note of that, there's something we also learnt, which was the trifecta principle, which means community engagement with the police and how things can escalate dramatically over a quick period of time. The trifecta principle is fundamentally you could be jaywalking or offensive language. That could be escalated into resisting arrest, assaulting police, and you're now in jail for something as simple as the F word or jaywalking. So the trifecta principle is something I really wanted to highlight, and I think Mr. Macaulay also did that, where things can be escalated extraordinarily over a very short period of time when they shouldn't have. So that's all.
Okay. Questions?
I'll start if you like. I'm just looking at your submission. I'm looking at 28 and 29, talking about the restrictions and the charging for cocaine and cobalt. These amounts are, as we've heard in this inquiry, set by Greyhound's Australasia, not by GWIC. GWIC is just enforcing those national rules. Is your argument that GWIC is doing something wrong there, or that the national rules are in need of amending?
I think I've taken note of that issue in the submission, that GWIC are there to enforce those rules, but that there's also discretion in relation to in relation to common sense sometimes. Also that.
Can you explain that? So, for example, if you say current rules prohibit cobalt levels above 100 nanograms per milliliter, so if there was testing that then found that, are you arguing that they should overlook that because the rule is too strict, or
So
are you asking GWIC to, I guess, quibble with the rules that they're sort of obliged to follow?
So I understand that the rules are implemented by the Greyhound Australasia, right? The federal body.
Which is the quantity and the type of substance. That's all set down by Greyhound's Australasia.
Correct.
Yeah, so I guess what's your argument here then? If you're arguing that the process of GWIC enforcing those rules is can be quite devastating on a participant, isn't the problem with the rules rather than GWIC?
Yeah, and that's what this committee's here for. That there are recommendations made in relation to the industry. So I think Mr. Macaulay also mentioned that one of the recommendations are that the absolute liability of presentation rules be varied.
Right, so it's not about the discretion of GWIC, it's about
Discretion up to the point of the conduct part that I wrote about towards the end of the submission. Conduct and other matters, starting from paragraph 37 and onwards.
Yeah, because then you've listed a whole bunch of people who have been done for having cobalt and stuff, but they were found to have breached the rules. It's just a little bit hard to understand. That's all what the argument is.
Yeah, so what I have done is I've actually outlined those rules, how they are being interpreted, how they are being conducted. So a lot of those were pre-race swabs. I think Dr. Major was something I also quoted from paragraph 33 onwards, and Professor Brian Hibbert from the University of New South Wales. So these people have spoken at length to cobalt. The fact that cobalt is done through the urine might not necessarily be the best way about it. That there might be other ways to conduct these samples, and that the inconsistency of the suspension periods, as you can see, varies dramatically. And also, I also took note of that I do understand the charges are different. So some people charge over 200 nanograms, and some people charge over 100 nanograms, and that sometimes there were previously where they've actually outlined what those quantities were. So there was, I think about a year or two ago, they just got rid of the quantity and just charged for the over 100 or over 200. But before that, they actually outlined. So, for example, paragraph 35, item number 13, actually has 129 units of measurements, 130 of measurements and whatnot.
Yeah, okay. But how would, just moving on to the recommendations then. So how would a separate tribunal that had to apply the same rules be helpful?
So I'd assume it'd be something like drink driving. If you're 0.51 or if you're 0.10, it's a massive difference, right? So if the cobalt level might be 1 nanogram over, or maybe you're 50 or 100 or 200 nanograms over, those things will be part of the mitigating circumstances, and that discretion could be implemented in relation to those punishments and severities.
Final question, then I'll let someone else have a go. In 8 and 9 of your recommendations summary, these things are pretty standard for regulators. GWIC has a tribunal, and it's a pretty kind of standard looking regulator in this respect. What's different about regulation of Greyhound participants that would require a different approach here?
So I think Mr. McCauley also mentioned this just previously, that you have the police, the prosecutor, the investigator, and fundamentally the judge all in one sort of government organisation. Now, I can appreciate the argument how that there's already a current panel in place, that panel is made up of the legal and chief stewards and the commissioners themselves, and how that's meant to be an impartial panel in determining the punishments. But again, it comes all under the same organisation. So
yeah, because it's an independent regulator, like any other kind of independent regulator that is tasked with doing exactly that.
Police is an independent regulator as well, but you can't have the police commissioner and...
They're not. No, it's a very different system. In terms of industry regulation, which is what this is, we're not talking about throwing people in jail, we're talking about disqualifying them for drugging dogs or doing whatever. We've heard many, many stories of quite horrific things still happening that GWIC are having to take participants to task for. They're not being put in jail. They're just being denied participation in an industry. This is an industry body. So on that basis, why would we take away one of the core functions of that independent regulator?
So I don't think, and I could be wrong, I didn't mention jail. So just go back to the driving example. If the police commissioner himself is taking driver licenses off people for 12 months or 24 months, and they might need that to provide for their family, that people rely on that form of income or that form of employment is now being stripped away from them, that it is something similar in respects to the police and how they conduct things.
I take the point, but that's not how we sort of do it, I guess. We have the police, we have criminal law, we have civil law, and then we have industry bodies and regulation. And this was the quid pro quo for allowing the industry to continue, was that it would have this strong independent regulator.
And definitely, there's no saying that there shouldn't be a regulator. I think everyone here and myself, I do believe GWIC needs to be there. That the industry before that was, in a bit of an issue. However, I think they've really come strong They've done really good, and I want to mention what GBOTA CEO Mr. Noy said previously at the opening of this committee. He actually said, I think, and I could be wrong here, 95% or 96% of the industry are actually doing the right thing. It's that 3 or 4% that we need to address. And I think GWIC has done a phenomenal job in addressing that 3-4% sort of, the new sheriff in town cleaning up the industry. But in doing so, I feel like they've also come and being that sheriff, they've put Aussie Post for driving on the footpath on the motorbike suspension. They've got the DHL driver jaywalking, his suspension. I feel like they're just really going a little bit above, and I think they've got rid of a lot of the baddies, but they're now coming after innocent minor infractions that might be...
Because people are getting apparently cocaine off of door handles and things.
Cocaine as in terms of 0.1 nanogram.
Yeah, apparently that's what's
You can get that off a banknote. You can get that off a bar stool. You can get that off, somewhere at the toilet just by touching the doorknob.
I do worry about the recent advertising campaign trying to get kids to racetracks if there's that much cocaine on the toilet doors. But anyway, I'll hand over to someone else.
Okay. Do you want to go now, or do you want me to?
Do you want to go?
No,
Sorry?
that was the
I'm
crossbench. But you
Yep.
go for 10 minutes and I'll go.
Okay, thanks. Can I just thank you for your attendance today, and appreciate your submission, which I've had a chance to read through. I've just been listening with interest as you, I guess, put forward the case for a tribunal, and I'm not sure you were here, but the chair and I did ask some questions of Mr. Macaulay about this tribunal proposal. Your recommendations, predominantly from about number 6 on to 10, but mainly 8, 9 and 10 talk about this tribunal and different arrangements for the severity, I suppose, mitigating factors and severity. I guess what I would pose to you is you've got a chance now to succinctly put to this committee your preferred model. And if it's the tribunal, why is it the tribunal, and how is it funded?
So these are just my opinions and way I see things, because I'm not GWIC or JNSW or anything. But the way I see things is that panel should be something similar to the AFL or the NRL sort of system, right? Where you have independent, and I appreciate that GWIC is independent, to an extent, but real independence as in outside of that industry, right? Outside of GWIC, outside of GNSW, that we have members sit on that panel and discuss and deliberate, and if possible, implement that disciplinary action required. In terms of budgeting and funding, that possibly it comes from the point of consumption tax, or that it comes from one or two of the bodies that currently exist and regulate the industry.
I've got several mates and their sons that play NRL, and they're not always necessarily overly enthused by their visits down to the tribunal. Could this not be a case of be careful what you're asking for?
I don't quite understand what.
But the tribunal may not always deliver the results that people want. Sometimes they're pretty severe and harsh in their penalties, particularly at the NRL. Is that? I guess I'm devil's advocate here. You're asking for it. You've got a chance. You're in front of the committee. You've got a chance to sell it. But have you looked at the pros and cons of such a model? What would you see as the cons, the downsides?
And that's a really good question. And I appreciate the question. The way that structure is not really because the way I see things, the independent panel would be consisted of 3, 4, 5, whatever members, that they would deliberate, assess, and then choose whatever disciplinary action they're going to enforce there. Very similar to the NRL. They have category 1, 2, 3 charges. I understand it. Everyone else that watch footies and the players understand it. They know what they're up for. And if they take a plea bargain, they get it comes down to a plea bargain and gets reduced a bit. So in the scheme of things, it makes sense. Now, that's fine, right? GWIC initiate the proceedings. They do the investigation. They bring it before the panel. The panel chooses the punishment, done and dusted. Now, if there is an issue, the New South Wales Racing Tribunal still stands. We're not saying get rid of that. That tribunal oversees the harnesses, the thoroughbreds and greyhounds. So that avenue is still there in regards to appeals and whatnot. So I hope that sort of addresses your question.
So, but the second part of the question that I posed was, so what, in your view, what are the downsides to such a model?
The downsides to a judiciary independent panel.
Yeah, as you proposed. Have you looked at both sides of this, the pros and the cons?
I can't hear you. Sorry.
The downsides would be obviously that these people aren't part of the industry, that they're not aware of Greyhound terminology or Greyhound practices or Greyhound sort of procedures, and maybe on prima facie they're not totally aware of what they're enforcing or what they're not enforcing. So maybe that could be a con.
And you also make some recommendations around education. The GWIC needs to better educate members of the racing rules, policies and legislation. And you talk about formal and informal approaches. Could you maybe elaborate on how you see that being implemented?
Definitely. And I think the member really raised a really good question there. Currently, as you're aware, the Greyhound meetings or Greyhound events are normally conducted at the racing venues. Greyhounds participate in race 1 to 10 or whatever it might be. And during those events, you have all the trainers in attendance. You have all the handlers in attendance. You actually have everyone there that you need to talk to that is part of the industry. Now, something as simple as a little tent or a little cubicle or a little whatever it might be, that GWIC might be able to engage with the participants and the trainers and do some sort of event there. And it's a good question you asked. There's something else I was thinking about on the way here in the car. Something as small as a bit of education to get your yearly renewals, for example, like a 10 sort of questionnaire that you might have to do online that then qualifies you to get your renewal process through, you know. That sort of 10 question questionnaire might involve rules and conduct and a bit of education there. Something similar to your annual legal or accounting sort of CP sort of points that you need, you know what I mean? So something as small as that in terms of education could go a long way, because currently, in my opinion, and what I'm hearing from participants, there's not much out there. There really isn't.
And have you tested your views with stakeholders within the sector?
So a lot of this information, as you're aware, is from the industry. People that didn't want to get named, especially, did shed their views and whatnot. I'm also a member of the GBOTA in my off time. I'm part of the Metro District Association, so that's one tier above the branch that I've been elected to, and we sort of deliberate and discuss all of this on a monthly basis. So there are a lot of concerns, and I could have written, you know, instead of 15 pages, 50 pages, but in terms of efficiency, I sort of did what I can in my own personal time.
Okay. I think that's got me, Robert.
Good, thank you.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Just coming back to your submission, under the first section you talk about education and I suppose the relative sophistication of country-based people who have traditionally been involved in the industry, and I'm certainly not in a disparaging way. And your recommendation A, which I found a little bit interesting, talking about using the American standard of reading Miranda rights. I understand exactly what you're getting at there, and you explain it quite well, especially as, in my experience, I'll get to this in a minute, the question in a minute, that when industry participants have been breached or found to be in breach of swabs or whatever, that's the substance matter. Many of them tend to explode.
Yes.
And they're automatically cop a conduct matter as well. And again, of the cases that I've heard, of, you know, been updated with over the years, sometimes the conduct matter can be just as bad in terms of penalty as the prohibited substance matter. Put aside all the arguments in relation to the substance matter breaches being, you know, in relation to cobalt, whether it should be this or that, what levels, whether it should be there at all. They're breached, bang, open the mouth, swear at the steward, bang, cop it again, swear it again, bang, get it again. Then what you're saying is that as soon as, or maybe you can tell me at what stage would they get a, let's call it the Miranda rights type warning, and you say also it should be handed to them in writing so they have a chance to read it and update themselves. And now, I guess that's a part of an approach to the natural justice exercise. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting sort of topic that I've discussed with GWIC as well, because GWIC are of the opinion, and sorry, not of the opinion, sorry, GWIC are rightfully entitled to not be abused. The members and their officers and their stewards not go to work should not be abused. That's not how things work. And if they are...
Educating the users part of this exercise, educating the participants, I should say?
That's pretty much where I'm trying to get at. So because they shouldn't tolerate such behaviours, that behaviour shouldn't occur or shouldn't be allowed to escalate. And a prime example of that would be, and I'll give you a hypothetical here, or something that's happened in an industry. Someone might be charged in relation to slapping a dog, right? That person is brought into an inquiry. That person stipulates that that dog headbutted him, that he has a broken nose, he's been injured, all he's done is smacked it on the bottom or something. The stewards might inquire and question again and again. This gentleman now might blow and go, effing hell, this is a joke, right? Then and there, should the caution be issued saying, excuse me, I don't appreciate the terminology. Here's a laminate. Here are the appropriate the rules that they're highlighting. Here are the appropriate penalties that might be involved if you continue. Now, if that gentleman goes, F you, come on, this is an effing joke, I can't effing believe it, then that's on them. But currently, there's no caution in relation to what they're facing, because people don't know. People don't know what they're facing. People don't know it's a month or 10-month or whatever sort of disciplinary process. They're expecting a couple $100 fine. Little do they know they're actually getting 10 months. Or 5 months, you know.
And
so
we've heard in evidence that 10 months can be exclusion from your own house because your Greyhound facility, as in the case with many family operations, is on their property, so they get excluded from their own property. Can't even live in their own house.
And can I just expand on what I was just saying before, Mr. Chair, if that's okay? I can't stress the importance of things getting out of control, like you said, blowing up, because what happens is those members of GWIC are now being hostilely attacked. They're receiving abuse, and that's not on, right? Because then what? GWIC now have liability and
no
go to court for that.
No one's questioning that.
The issue needs the education needs to be implemented.
My questions to you in relate to the angle you've taken in relation to better education, understanding, and warning of the participants who are being found to be in breach, or potentially in breach.
Okay.
Carry on. Yep.
And no, I totally agree that shouldn't happen, and that the caution should be issued at an early instance, that those people are aware of what that they're doing is not right, and that it's being taken seriously by GWIC.
Okay. Any other questions? No more questions?
So GWIC want to punish people out of that behaviour, which I respect, but I don't appreciate that sort of view. I believe education, based on my submission, is the key to proceed going forward.
Yeah, I think that's duly noted. On page 11, you talk about the relative severity of penalties, and I think this sort of keys into what previous evidence was given, that there isn't currently any flexibility in what penalty can be applied. Do you want to speak to? You're talking there in terms of minor and then major penalties?
Yeah, so this isn't something that's outlined per se. These are just my understandings of how something is a major and a minor sort of disciplinary action, in my opinion. So going back to the member, Vic, was it?
Yeah.
What he mentioned was how would the panel work? I would stipulate that the major conduct and other matters are brought before the panel, and the minor matters still stay within the purview of possibly GWIC. So something like parking fines can stay with GWIC. Something that's more serious can then go before the panel, if that sort of simplifies it for you.
Okay. In your recommendation C's, you're talking about just this sort of thing, I think, in terms of remove absolute liability for presentation rules, then GWIC remove minimum sentencing to assist holistic consideration and mitigating circumstances and factors.
Yep.
And you talk about a body other than GWIC deliberate and sentence on serious charges. Is this what you're getting to now?
Exactly. We're going to a panel or a separate sort of thing to deliberate on those sort of matters.
So who would wear the costs of this extra panel in terms of if you had to turn up to this tribunal? And would it be a no-costs jurisdiction like NCAT, for example?
That's something for this committee sort of to look into.
I just thought you might have a recommendation in relation to it.
Possibly the POC sort of system that the funding could come from there.
You talk about in relation to advocacy for the industry, some sort of legal aid body or monies. What have you got envisaged there? Only in terms of major charges or minor or all or none or both, or what's the story there?
Just again, it depends on the funding and how that's going to be structured and the amount of people that are involved in that sort of group. The way I see it is it represents the industry as a whole across all the state. That could be accessed by any handler or any trainer or anyone in relation to a disciplinary action taken by GWIC. And that possibly, again, just like illegal aid, they might not represent the $100 parking fine, but they might represent, the 10-year sentence or incarceration or suspension or something serious, right? So again, we use that sort of similar model that legal aid has, because I know the Greyhounds are out of legal aid's purview. So we should incorporate something for the industry by the industry.
And by that you mean what would, for example, be funded perhaps by GR New South Wales in a pool?
That's something outside of my scope, so I'm not sure. But again, there is point of consumption taxes that are there that possibly could come out of both. I mean, that's entirely up to the committee to sort of look into.
All right, thank you.
I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Ange, just a little bit more. I was just reading the beginning of your submission. These Greyhound ownership syndicates. What is that?
So the way a Greyhound syndicate works is there's a group of people. So it could be, I think GWIC have 2 or 3 as a minimum, whatever it is. And I think there's a maximum of 20 that could be incorporated into a syndicate. And it's basically a registered body with GWIC. That body is now in charge of a specific Greyhound or group of Greyhounds.
Yeah, okay. So it's a group of you that sort of come together to you purchase the Greyhound and then you're sort of responsible for racing it and you share the prize money. Right, okay. You say that you are responsible for introducing over 100 new and young participants into the Greyhound racing industry. Does that mean, was that in the process of building those syndicates?
Correct. So roughly we started with a Greyhound, just me and my business partner. That was done through just 2 people in a syndicate. We've then grown that into another one called Dixie Gambles. That's our second purchase. We had a number of friends that jumped in together on that. And we've just sort of brought this industry sort of to participants, to the general population. Because before that, people were unsure about how to get into a Greyhound. For example, me and my business partner spent probably 3 or 4 months trying to work out the path of getting involved. And it's just very, very difficult as opposed to the thoroughbreds.
So you did that first one, and then how did you find the people to come into the next kind of syndicate?
Very good question. So we operate a tipping service. I'm not sure if you're aware. That tipping service is on social media and through websites and whatnot. We actually have a very big following. So a lot of friends are part of that tipping service where they procure our weekly tips. That might involve rugby. That might involve horses. That might involve Greyhounds. Might involve NBA, whatever. Through that, we sort of met a lot of friends that would go to games, that would go to races, would have beers, would hang out. And through that sort of network, we sort of were able to grow this much more efficiently.
Okay, so you had this tipping. How many people were on this? Is this like Facebook or this social media? Is that
everywhere? So we have Instagram, we have Facebook,
Yeah.
We have websites. We had TikTok, I believe, until they took us down because we were putting too many races.
Right.
It was a breach of their terms or something.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so
So how
variety of
many
channels.
people are we talking about that are following on something
Thousands.
like thousands?
Yeah.
And then how do you, I guess, do you then kind of, so you're doing the tipping service, and then when were you then saying, hey, do people want to come into be a part of this syndicate, or?
The people coming to us, they saw us have a greyhound. They were very curious. They said, geez, we want to join. Let us join, please, please. We said, okay. We found a second dog. So that's sort of how it sort of began, the journey.
Yeah, right. Okay. So then, okay, you refer to them as friends, but really it's just people who kind of approached, and then presumably as part of being in the syndicate, they're acquaintances.
Brothers,
and
my
stuff.
mum,
Yeah.
my family relatives, my partner's family relatives,
Yeah.
our friends, our high school mates, our university mates.
Yeah.
A variety of people of all days of,
But also these people who are approaching you through the website or through socials.
Potentially, yeah. But of course, we've met them. We've gone for beers. We've hung out. There's a lot of friends throughout, yeah.
Because there's a distinction, isn't there, in the type of syndicate that you're running, if it's friends or if it's public.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you'd want to be very careful that you were telling us that these were all friends.
Well, there is legislation in regards to what you're bringing up, specifically with hawking, with advertising, with promotion.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we try and abide by all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Any more questions?
Done.
I don't think I have.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Ange, for coming today. And yeah, that will bring I don't think you took anything on notice, so I think we're fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have we got a deliberative at all?
Yeah.
The table documents, wasn't it?